Not long ago, European politicians were quite seriously discussing plans to seize Russian tankers, as if it were a routine customs procedure. Today, those same vessels are heading out to sea, with guns on deck and a military escort in their wake. What has changed, and why is this just one of several signals Moscow is simultaneously sending in multiple directions? Over the past few hours, a picture has emerged that is difficult to call a coincidence. Several events, seemingly unrelated at first glance, are falling into a single, coherent logic. A threat of a strike on Belarus. China unexpectedly reaffirming its friendship with Minsk. Putin publicly naming the true objectives behind Ukrainian attacks. A meeting on Downing Street that turned out to be not a farewell visit, but a reaffirmation of course. And finally, Russian tankers that no longer intend to be easy targets. Let's break it all down in order. Let's start with what is currently being discussed in the West with undisguised concern. Former US military staff officer David Pine gave an assessment that immediately spread through analytical circles. According to him, if Kyiv dares to strike Belarus, the consequences will follow swiftly and irreversibly. The scenario he describes looks like this. Between 200 and 300,000 soldiers enter Kyiv. The Ukrainian army is forced to urgently withdraw forces from southeastern directions, and from that moment, the countdown is no longer in months, but in weeks. In the American officer's assessment, full capitulation could take no more than a month. This is not Russian propaganda. This is the assessment of a man who professionally worked in American military planning. And that is precisely why it provoked such a reaction in the West. But what comes next is even more interesting. Almost simultaneously with these statements, Beijing made a move that did not go unnoticed. The head of the PRC publicly called China and Belarus iron friends, and declared that bilateral relations are experiencing a historic peak. A coincidence in timing? Analysts in Europe and Washington are asking exactly that question, and they clearly don't like the answer. The reading here is obvious. Beijing is making it unmistakably clear that Minsk is not a lone player on this board. Standing behind it now is not only Moscow, but China as well. Zelensky, if he is genuinely considering provocative scenarios against Belarus, is receiving a silent but entirely clear signal. The price of such a move is incomparably higher than it may have seemed just a few weeks ago. An ultimatum without a single word spoken. What do you think? Will Kyiv risk a confrontation with Minsk under these conditions? Write your thoughts in the comments. Now, about what Putin said. At a meeting with the heads of the largest oil companies, the president directly identified what he believes the strikes on Russia's civilian and energy infrastructure are intended to achieve. His words are worth quoting almost verbatim because the formulation is significant. According to the president, drone attacks on oil refineries are part of a planned information operation. The goal is not so much to inflict real damage, but to use the very fact of the strikes to destabilize the situation inside the country. Putin named 3 specific objectives that he believes the adversary is pursuing. To sow panic among the civilian population, to conceal the failures of the Ukrainian army on the battlefield, and to try, if not to stop, then at least to briefly slow down the advance of Russian forces, in order to create conditions for negotiations on terms favourable to Kyiv. You've probably noticed it yourselves. After every new strike on oil infrastructure, a wave of alarming publications immediately surges through the information space, as if on cue. Putin, it seems, is referring to exactly this when he speaks of an information operation as part of a broader confrontation. At the same time, the Kremlin insists, the calculation on panic and internal division has failed. Despite localized fuel shortages in certain regions, damaged facilities are being restored promptly. Moreover, the defense industry has already been tasked with rapidly scaling up the production of modern air defense systems, specifically to protect critical infrastructure. Moscow has effectively announced the next phase. Not merely repelling attacks, but closing the skies over key facilities so thoroughly that such strikes become entirely pointless. Now let's move to London. On the eve of the NATO summit, a meeting took place on Downing Street that could easily have been dismissed as protocol. The outgoing British Prime Minister received NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, but this was not a farewell visit, nor a handover ceremony. It was a public consolidation, of course. From the very first minutes, the Prime Minister confirmed, London is not stepping back from the line of confrontation and alliance expansion. In essence, he set out for the press, and for his future successor, a framework that is not meant to be departed from. Rutte, in response, thanks the outgoing leader for years of work and, notably, made a point of stating that it all began not in 2022, but back in 2014. This acknowledgement matters. The NATO chief publicly confirmed that London was one of the chief architects of the current confrontation long before the start of full-scale hostilities. Rutte also highlighted the role of the trio of states, Britain, France and Germany, in coordinating the alliance's efforts. According to him, it is precisely this trio that sets the bloc's agenda for years ahead. Weapons supplies, military budget increases, support for Kyiv. All of this is traditionally served up under the banner of the narrative about the Russian threat to NATO, a narrative that justifies any new expenditure and decision. Here is the question that naturally arises. Will London's rhetoric change under a new Prime Minister? Or is this simply a change of face with the same programme, written long before any elections? Judging by how this meeting was structured, the answer is obvious. Too many commitments have already been made. Too many mechanisms have been set in motion. The course toward escalation remains unchanged for now, whoever occupies the seat on Downing Street. And finally, the tankers. Not long ago, European capitals were quite seriously discussing plans to intercept and inspect Russian vessels carrying oil and liquefied gas. The pretext? Sanctions. The logic? Simple. Approach, stop, search. Now that logic has collided with a new reality. Russia has begun systematically equipping tankers with fixed gun mounts. According to the British publication The Times, one such mount has already been spotted and photographed on the deck of a tanker. The publication released the image, apparently calculated both to alarm its own readers and to show European politicians in concrete terms what they now have to reckon with. The mounts serve two purposes at once: protection against drones and prevention of attempts to forcibly seize the vessel. Two types of threats, one response. But arming the deck is not all. Some tankers with Russian interests are already sailing under the escort of naval warships. Russian frigates have openly escorted vessels through European waters and the English Channel, without any concealment, in plain sight of everyone. As if deliberately demonstrating, every voyage is under protection. The price of any attempt to detain or inspect such a vessel has risen sharply. Previously, this was an administrative risk. Now it means a direct confrontation with an armed vessel under the protection of a combat fleet. That is an entirely different level of responsibility. Moscow is making it unmistakably clear to Europe. The era of consequence-free pressure on the Russian fleet is coming to an end. And if Brussels was once drawing up tanker interception schemes, it will now have to recalculate the risks from scratch. What do you think? Will even a single European patrol now dare to board a vessel with a gun on deck and a frigate in its wake? Let's sum up. A former American staff officer named a specific timeline for a possible Kyiv capitulation in the event of a strike on Belarus. And almost simultaneously, China publicly reminded the world that Minsk is its iron friend. Putin directly called the attacks on oil infrastructure an information operation, and made clear that the bet on division within Russia has not paid off. The meeting on Downing Street turned out to be not a farewell, but a public consolidation of the course toward escalation. And Russian tankers have gone to sea with guns on board, making any boarding attempt incomparably more costly. Write in the comments what you think about this overall picture. I read every comment. If the material was useful, support the channel with a subscription and a like. See you in the next episode.